My parents offered to pay for my wedding to make up for the past, but then sent me the bill, and my next move taught them their own cruel lesson. I'm 28, female, and married to my husband, Mark, who is 29, male. We've been together for years and tied the knot a little over a year ago. The wedding itself was everything we wanted, small, intimate, and meaningful. Nothing over the top, because Mark and I are pretty practical people. We didn't see the point in blowing all our savings on one day when we have our entire future to think about. But this post isn't about the wedding itself. It's about what happened after, or maybe I should say it's about everything that led up to it, because looking back now, there were so many red flags that I ignored. Let me rewind a bit and explain my family dynamic. I grew up as the second child in what most people would call a normal family. My older sister, Grace, 32, female, was always the favorite. I'm not saying this in a woe is me kind of way, it's just the truth. Growing up, Grace got everything, the best clothes, the newest gadgets, and all the attention. If she wanted something, my parents made it happen. Meanwhile, I got her hand-me-downs and learned early on that if I wanted something, I'd have to work for it. I started working part-time at 16 to buy my own clothes, save for college, and occasionally treat myself to small luxuries. I didn't resent it at the time because I genuinely liked being independent. But the way my parents differentiated between us wasn't just in material things, it was everything: how they talked to us, how they treated our achievements, and how they showed their love. For Grace, it was always hugs, compliments, and pride. For me, a polite good job and then back to focusing on her. Fast forward to adulthood, and nothing really changed. Grace got married 3 years ago, and my parents gave her a wedding gift of $250,000. That's not an exaggeration, that's the exact amount they handed her and her husband, Sean, so they could buy a house. I remember being genuinely happy for her at the time, but it also stung. I mean, who wouldn't feel a little hurt? But I told myself, it's their money, and they can do what they want with it. So, when Mark proposed to me, I didn't expect anything from my parents. Mark and I had been saving for years and had budgeted around $18,000 for the wedding. It wasn't going to be extravagant, no grand ballroom or designer wedding gown, but it would be elegant and exactly what we wanted, a day to celebrate with the people we loved. Then, out of nowhere, my parents offered to pay for the wedding. Honestly, it caught me off guard. They'd never been overly generous with me growing up, and I had long accepted that I couldn't expect the kind of support they gave Grace. But they seemed unusually enthusiastic about it. They sat us down, talked about how happy they were for us, and said they wanted to take the burden off our shoulders. It felt surreal, hearing my mom say, "You've always been so responsible, and we want you to enjoy this day without worrying about money." I was shocked. I'm not going to lie, it felt like they were finally seeing me as someone worth celebrating. My mom was so excited, asking about venues, caterers, and flowers. My dad was more laid back, but even he seemed enthusiastic. They assured me over and over that this was their gift to us. I didn't question it because, honestly, I wanted to believe it. I finally felt like I was being treated as an equal to Grace. Maybe they were trying to make up for the past. Maybe they were proud of me in their own way. Whatever the reason, I accepted their help, and we started planning the wedding together. The day itself was perfect. Mark and I said our vows in front of 50 of our closest friends and family. My parents gave heartfelt speeches, danced with us, and acted like the proudest parents on earth. It seemed like everything was okay between us. But that feeling didn't last long. 2 days after the wedding, I was sitting at home, still on a high from how amazing everything had been. Mark was at work, and I was going through some leftover wedding stuff when I got an email from my dad. I thought it was going to be something sweet, maybe a photo or a kind word about the wedding. Instead, it was an invoice. Every single expense they had paid for was listed in painstaking detail, from the flowers to the cake to the DJ. Everything. The total came to $17,843.62, and the email was short and to the point: "Please settle this at your earliest convenience." I just sat there, not believing it. My parents had offered to pay for the wedding. I hadn't asked them for a dime. They had acted like this was their way of celebrating me and Mark, but now they were treating it like a business transaction. When Mark got home, I showed him the email. He was furious, not because of the money, we could pay it if we had to, but because of the principle. This wasn't just about the invoice, it was about years of being treated as less than, years of watching Grace get everything while I worked for scraps. I spent the whole night crying and going back and forth in my head. Should I confront them? Should I just pay it and move on? Would saying something even make a difference? Mark is supportive and told me to do whatever I feel is right, but I feel that this is about more than just the wedding. I don't know what it is. So, now I'm sitting here wondering what to do. Do I pay the invoice and let it go just to keep the peace, even though it feels like swallowing yet another insult? Or do I confront them, which will probably turn into a big fight that won't actually change anything? Part of me feels like I should stand up for myself, but another part wonders if it's even worth it after all these years. Have any of you dealt with something like this? I feel stuck, and I could really use some outside perspective. What would you do? So, I've been replaying everything in my head non-stop, trying to figure out how it got to this point. The invoice wasn't just about the money, it was the final straw in a lifetime of feeling overlooked and undervalued. Most of you in the comments said I needed to stand up for myself and set boundaries, and honestly, you're right. If I didn't take a stand now, I'd be letting them walk all over me like they always have. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but something had to change. So, I sat down and poured everything into a letter, every ounce of anger, frustration, and pain I'd bottled up over the years. I told them in no uncertain terms how deeply hurt I was, not just by the invoice but by a lifetime of being treated as second best. I called out their mistakes in not treating me and my sister equally, their emotional manipulation, and how their so-called gift was nothing more than a cruel setup. It wasn't just the wedding, they had taken one of the happiest moments of my life and turned it into yet another power play. I didn't sugarcoat anything. I told them I had spent years watching them shower Grace with love and support while I was left to fend for myself, and now, even in what should have been a gesture of generosity, they managed to make it about control. I let them know that this would be the last time they'd ever hold money over my head, no more gifts with strings attached, no more fake support, and no more of their manipulative games. I included a check for the full amount, down to the last cent. That check wasn't just payment for a wedding, it was payment for my freedom from their toxicity. I made it crystal clear that I was done playing by their rules, done pretending everything was okay, and done being the afterthought in their family. I mailed the letter and the check, and as soon as I did, I blocked their numbers. I didn't want their excuses or justifications because, honestly, what could they possibly say to make this okay? It was a misunderstanding? We didn't mean it like that? No, they knew exactly what they were doing, and I wasn't going to let them twist this around. For once, I was standing up for myself, and I wasn't looking back. It wasn't just a piece of paper, it was a reminder that no matter how much I try, I'll never be Grace. And with that, I thought I could move on. I figured they'd cash the check, maybe complain among themselves, and that would be the end of it. Yeah, I was wrong. Turns out, my family isn't the type to let things slide quietly. About a week after I sent the letter, my phone blew up one morning with texts from random family members, cousins, uncles, aunts I barely talked to. At first, I was confused. Then I opened the messages. Why are you being so cruel to your parents? Your mom's heartbroken. How could you do this? They were trying to do something nice, and this is how you repay them? It felt like I'd been blindsided. My parents had clearly gone to work spinning their version of the story. From what I could piece together, they told everyone that they'd offered to help with the wedding, but I had demanded too much and then disrespected them by refusing to acknowledge their generosity. The narrative was so far from the truth it was almost funny, except it wasn't. Grace, of course, was leading the charge. She called me multiple times that day, which I ignored. Then she showed up at my apartment that evening. Mark was still at work, so I was home alone when I heard the banging on my door. Open up, Mia. I know you're in there. I froze. I wasn't in the mood for a confrontation, especially with Grace, but she wasn't giving up. She kept banging and shouting, calling me selfish and accusing me of tearing the family apart. This isn't just about you, Mia. You're making mom cry every day and dad stressed out of his mind, all over some stupid check. I stayed silent, hoping she'd leave, but she didn't. Instead, she launched into this rant about how I'd always been difficult and how our parents had done everything for me. I grabbed my phone and started recording. I didn't know what she was going to do next, but I wasn't taking any chances. She kept yelling through the door, throwing phrases like, "You're ungrateful. And do you even care about anyone but yourself?" The irony wasn't lost on me. This was coming from the same sister who'd never worked a day in her life and had her entire lifestyle funded by our parents. Eventually, she gave up and left, but not before muttering something about how I'd regret this. I thought that was the end of it, but of course, it wasn't. The next day, the texts and calls from extended family started again. A few relatives actually tried to be neutral, saying things like, maybe you should just talk to your parents and smooth things over, but the majority were firmly team parents. One cousin straight up called me disrespectful and told me I should be grateful my parents taught me a lesson. A lesson about what? How to be a pushover. What really ached my heart was that nobody was interested in hearing my side. To them, my parents were these perfect, selfless people who had done nothing but shower me with love and support, and I was the brat daughter causing unnecessary drama. It didn't matter that I'd been paying my own way since I was 16 or that I hadn't asked my parents for a dime for the wedding. None of that fit their narrative, so they ignored it. Mark was furious. He wanted to call out my parents directly, but I begged him not to. The last thing I needed was for this to escalate even more. Instead, I decided to talk to one person I thought might actually listen, my aunt, Erin. Erin is my mom's younger sister, and she's always been the black sheep of the family. She moved out of state years ago and only comes around for big holidays. I've always gotten the sense that she doesn't fully buy into the whole Grace is perfect, Mia is difficult thing. When I called her and explained what was going on, she wasn't surprised. Mia, I hate to say it, but your parents have always been like this. They just hide it better with other people, she said. She went on to tell me that when she was younger, my grandparents had pulled the same kind of stunts with her that my parents were now pulling with me. They'd offer help, make it seem like a gift, and then use it as leverage to control her. When she finally pushed back, they cut her off. Hearing that hit me deeply. It was like I was reliving a family pattern I didn't even know existed. Erin told me I wasn't crazy for standing up for myself and that if I wanted peace, I'd have to stop expecting my parents to change. They are who they are, Mia. They're not going to wake up one day and realize they've been unfair. You've got to let go of that hope, or it'll eat you alive. I realized I'd spent so much of my life trying to prove myself to my parents, hoping they'd finally see me as equal to Grace. But what if that was never going to happen? A few days later, I got a message from my cousin Sarah. She and I used to be close, so I thought maybe she'd offer some support. Instead, she said, "You're lucky to have parents who care enough to teach you responsibility. Most people would kill for that kind of support." That's when I knew I had to stop engaging. I muted all the group chats, ignored the calls, and focused on the life Mark and I were building together. My parents could spin their story however they wanted. I wasn't going to waste any more energy trying to defend myself to people who'd already made up their minds. Grace, of course, didn't stop. She kept posting passive-aggressive stuff on social media about family being the most important thing and some people forgetting where they came from. I'm actually stunned. I didn't realize one letter from my heart would cause this much chaos, and honestly, at this point, I'm feeling like I overreacted. Looking at how they lashed out at me, maybe I should have reacted differently. What do you think? Things are running in a different direction. My parents, as expected, escalated things in a way that left me shaking my head. I woke up yesterday morning to an email from my mom, sent through her work email, the only one I hadn't blocked. The email was long, condescending, and dripping with their usual tone of superiority. In it, she explained that the wedding invoice wasn't meant to be taken seriously. According to her, they never actually intended to cash the check. Instead, it was all, in her words, a life lesson about financial responsibility. They wanted to test my reaction, and once they felt I'd learned the lesson, they planned to surprise me with a real wedding gift of $100,000. I mean, how the heck did they come up with that? A life lesson? Manipulating your own daughter and sending a detailed invoice for her wedding is supposed to teach responsibility? It felt less like parenting and more like a calculated move to control me. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Anything I said would have only given them more fuel. But the universe wasn't done with me yet. That afternoon, I got a call from an unknown number. It was my dad's estranged brother, Uncle Steve. "Hey, Mia," he said. "I heard about what's been going on with your parents. I wanted to reach out because, well, I've been there." At first, I wasn't sure how to react. Uncle Steve was practically a ghost in my life, a name I'd heard in passing, always followed by some version of troublemaker or ungrateful. My parents made sure we knew he wasn't someone to look up to. Steve went on to explain that he'd caught wind of the situation through mutual family connections, thanks to my parents airing their grievances far and wide. And then he said, "I know we don't know each other well, but I think you need to hear this. Your parents are in history." He told me how, years ago, my grandparents, my dad's parents, pulled the same manipulative tactics with him. They promised to help Steve and his wife buy their first home, calling it a gift, but a year later, they demanded the money back, claiming it had always been a loan. When Steve couldn't repay them immediately, they threatened to sue him. "I thought your dad would stand by me," he said, but instead, he sided with them, called me ungrateful, and helped them smear my name to the rest of the family. That's when they erased me from their life. They cut me off completely, financially and emotionally. Your dad didn't just let it happen, he was part of it. Hearing this shook me to my core. It wasn't just that my parents were being manipulative, it was a learned behavior, passed down like some twisted family tradition. They're going to keep pushing, Mia. They're not going to stop until you either give in or cut ties completely. And if you do cut ties, they'll still make you out to be the villain, just like our parents did to me, he said. Steve's words hit me hard. I'd spent my whole life trying to prove myself to my parents, hoping one day they'd see me as their equal. But what if that day was never going to come? What if I was trapped in a cycle they didn't even recognize they were perpetuating? That night, I sat down with Mark and laid it all out. I told him everything Steve had said and how it mirrored my own experience. Mark was supportive, as always, but he didn't try to sugarcoat things. "You don't owe them anything, Mia," he said. "You deserve to live your life without constantly feeling like you're auditioning for their approval." And that's where I am now. What do you guys think of the lesson they are teaching me and the test that I failed hard in? Every time I think about it, I can't help but laugh, although I'm deeply hurt. Honestly, it's hard to decide to cut your parents off completely. But after everything they put me through and that life lesson they gave me, I'm definitely not letting them control me. So, after everything, I thought I'd finally have some peace. I blocked their numbers, muted the group chats, and tried to move on. But my parents, they weren't done. They always had to have the last word, and this time, they made it clear they weren't backing down. It started with another letter, this time from my dad. No formalities, just him leaning heavily into the guilt trip. He wrote pages about how I was breaking their hearts, how my actions had caused my mom sleepless nights, and how disappointed they were in me for abandoning the family. It was dripping with manipulation, but one part stood out. He doubled down on the idea that the invoice and the whole situation was a lesson. According to him, they weren't trying to hurt me but teach me about responsibility. He wrote that the wedding invoice was never about the money, it was about testing my reaction. Apparently, they had hoped I would prove myself grateful and responsible, and their plan had been to reward me with an even bigger surprise gift. Testing my reaction? It felt like they were trying to justify their cruelty by pretending it was some noble act of parenting. What kind of parents turn their daughter's wedding into a game and then act shocked when she doesn't play along? I didn't respond to the letter. I couldn't. Anything I said would have just fueled their narrative. Instead, I filed it away with the wedding invoice and tried to focus on work. But 2 days later, they showed up at my apartment. Mark was at work again, and I was home alone when I heard the knock. When I opened the door, there they were, my mom and dad, standing there like everything was fine. "We need to talk," my mom said. I stepped out into the hallway and closed the door behind me. "What are you doing here?" I asked sharply. "We're worried about you," my dad said. "This behavior isn't like you." "Worried?" I snapped. "You sent me a wedding invoice as a test, wrote me letters justifying it as a life lesson, and now you're here to lecture me? You've got to be kidding me." My mom sighed. "Mia, you're blowing this out of proportion. We're trying to help you understand responsibility. It's for your own good," I laughed bitterly. "Responsibility? Where was this lesson when you handed Grace $250,000 with no strings attached? Why didn't she need to prove herself responsible?" That hit a nerve. My mom's face hardened, and my dad's jaw tightened. "Grace's situation is different," my dad said defensively. "Different how?" I shot back. "Because she's your favorite? Because she does whatever you say without question?" "We don't play favorites," my mom said coldly. "Grace is just more respectful. She understands the value of family." I couldn't help but laugh again. "Respectful? She's never worked a day in her life, and you pay all her bills. Meanwhile, I've been independent since I was 16, and you're standing here lecturing me about responsibility." At that point, my dad's patience snapped. "You need to stop this attitude right now," he barked. "We've given you everything, and this is how you repay us, by humiliating us and ignoring everything we've done for you?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my cool. "You offered to pay for my wedding. I didn't ask for it. Then you sent me an invoice to teach me a lesson. I paid it. What more do you want from me? We want you to acknowledge the hurt you've caused," my mom said, her voice trembling with fake emotion. "We want you to show some gratitude for everything we've done for you." "Gratitude?" I repeated, my voice rising. "For what? For treating me like an afterthought my entire life? For turning my wedding into some twisted test? You've got to be kidding me." My dad stepped closer, his tone low and threatening. "Watch your mouth, Mia. We're your parents. We deserve your respect. And I deserve to be treated like a human being," I said firmly, "not a pawn in your games." At that point, I'd had enough. "This conversation is over," I said, stepping back toward my door. "If you can't treat me with respect, then you're not welcome in my life." My mom's face turned red as she dragged my dad back to their car, giving me that look of being shameful from their unreasonable daughter. After they left, I stood there shaking, overwhelmed with a mix of anger and sadness. Part of me wondered if I'd pushed too far, but the other part, the part that was finally learning to stand up for myself, knew I'd done the right thing. That night, I called Uncle Steve and told him what had happened. He wasn't surprised. "They're losing control over you," he said. "That's why they're escalating. They don't know how to handle the fact that you're standing up for yourself." He reminded me of something he'd said during our first call: "They'll never admit they're wrong. To them, this is about power, not love." After hearing that, I sat down and started thinking about everything: the patterns, the manipulation, the control. It all felt so heavy. I couldn't shake the feeling that their narrative would always win because they'd been working overtime to spin their version of events to the extended family. Every call, every text I received seemed to come from someone who had already been primed to see me as the villain. Then I started questioning, why was I letting them control the story? Why was I staying silent while they smeared my name? For years, I'd kept my feelings bottled up, trying to keep the peace, but this time, it wasn't just about me. It was about exposing a pattern that went deeper than just the wedding fiasco. So, I made a decision. I was going to share my story, not to hurt them, but to tell the truth, to reclaim my voice, and to make sure the people buying into their lies saw the full picture. The next weekend, I sat down with Mark and started drafting the post. I poured out everything: my parents' life lesson, their history of favoritism toward Grace, the years of manipulation disguised as love, and the toxic dynamic that had shaped my life. I included specifics, like the wedding invoice and their visit to my apartment, but I kept it factual. I didn't want to exaggerate or come off as overly emotional because I knew they'd use that against me. It wasn't just about me, though. As I wrote, I thought about Uncle Steve and everything he told me. I decided to include his story too. It was clear this wasn't a one-off situation. It was a cycle that had been repeating for generations. Once I finished, Mark helped me edit it. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, his voice full of concern. "You know there's going to be backlash." "I know," I said, "but I can't keep letting them control everything. It's time people saw the truth." The hardest part was deciding where to post it. I settled on Facebook, where most of my extended family would see it. I knew it would cause a stir, but I also knew it was the only way to ensure my side of the story was heard. The response was immediate. Within hours, the comments and messages started pouring in. Some were supportive, thanking me for sharing my story and expressing disbelief at my parents' actions. Others were exactly what I expected: family loyalists rushing to defend my parents and Grace. One comment read, "Mia, your parents have done everything for you, and this is how you repay them? You're ungrateful and selfish." Another said, "Steve poisoned you against them. You've become just like him, trouble for the family." But there were supportive messages too. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in years messaged me privately, saying, "I always knew there was something off about how they treated you and Grace. I'm so sorry you had to go through this. You're so brave for speaking up." That evening, I got a voicemail from my dad: "Mia, I cannot believe you would stoop this low. You're airing private family matters for the world to see. This is disgusting. You've humiliated us. Do you have any idea what you've done to your mother?" It was the same guilt-tripping rhetoric I'd heard my whole life, but this time, it didn't affect me. I didn't feel the need to defend myself or justify my actions. Grace, of course, had to jump in. She made her own post, painting our parents as saints who had sacrificed everything for us and accusing me of being a spoiled brat who didn't appreciate them. She conveniently left out the part where she'd been handed $250,000 with no strings attached. Her post gained traction with her friends and family loyalists, many of whom jumped into my comments to attack me. It was messy and exhausting, but for the first time, I felt like I was standing up for myself. I don't know how you guys might react to this move, but for me, the post wasn't just about exposing the truth. It was about freeing myself from their control. It was a way of reclaiming my life and saying, "You don't get to tell my story anymore. That's it for now." So, it had been a few weeks since the public letter went live, and the fallout was still in full swing. I was holding my ground, determined not to cave to my parents' manipulations, but I wasn't prepared for what came next. One quiet Saturday afternoon, I heard a knock at my door. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I looked through the peephole, I saw my dad standing there, holding what looked like an envelope. I didn't know what to do. I thought if I opened the door, he would start a fight with me, as always. But from the look on his face, he seemed calm, almost tired. So, I finally opened the door, keeping the chain latch in place. "Mia," he said, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it, "can we talk?" I didn't move. "What do you want, Dad?" He sighed and held up the envelope. "I came to give you this. It's the check you sent for the wedding expenses. Your mom and we've been thinking about everything, and we want to give it back. We don't want the money anymore." I stared at him, stunned. For a moment, I thought he might actually be apologizing, but then I noticed the way his hands were trembling and the way he couldn't quite meet my eyes. This wasn't an act of kindness. It was another manipulation. I don't want it, I said, my voice steady. Mia, please, he said, his tone shifting to desperation. We don't want this to keep tearing the family apart. Just take it, and let's put this behind us. I shook my head. This isn't about the money, Dad. It's about how you've treated me my entire life. Giving me back the check doesn't erase that. His face hardened. You're being stubborn. Do you know how much this has hurt your mother? Your sister? They're devastated, Mia. I knew where this was going, and I wasn't going to let him guilt me into backing down. If you're so worried about Mom and Grace, maybe you should take a look at how your actions got us here, I said, my voice sharp. You don't get to show up here with a check and act like that fixes everything. He stood there for a long moment, his jaw tight, before shoving the envelope through the crack in the door and walking away without another word. I left the envelope where it was, refusing to even touch it. A few days later, I found out what that visit was really about through a mutual friend. I learned that Grace was struggling to get pregnant. She and her husband had been trying for over a year with no success and had just started fertility treatments. It didn't take long to connect the dots. The timing was too perfect. My parents had cashed my wedding check weeks ago, and now Grace was undergoing expensive treatments. I did some quick research on the cost of the treatment, and the cost lined up almost exactly with the amount I had sent them. They hadn't returned the money out of guilt or remorse, they'd already spent it. The news hit me hard. It wasn't just about the money. It was the way they'd always bent over backward for Grace while treating me like an afterthought. Even now, after everything that had happened, they were still prioritizing her over me. When I told Mark, he was furious. They're unbelievable, he said. They have no shame. I tried to focus on my own life, but the resentment lingered. It wasn't that I didn't want Grace to have a family, I just couldn't stomach the fact that my parents were still so deeply entrenched in their favoritism. But then, life threw me a curve I didn't see coming. A few weeks after learning about Grace's treatments, I started feeling off. I chalked it up to stress at first, but when the symptoms didn't go away, I decided to take a test, and it turns out I am pregnant. Mark was overjoyed when I told him. We'd talked about starting a family someday, but we hadn't been actively trying yet. It felt like a gift, something pure and beautiful amidst all the chaos with my family. When word eventually got out, it didn't take long for the drama to start. Grace, predictably, wasn't happy. I heard through the family grapevine that she was devastated and thought my pregnancy was a personal attack on her. She's being so selfish, Grace reportedly said. She knows how hard this has been for me, and now she's flaunting her happiness in my face. I hadn't spoken to Grace in months, let alone flaunted anything, but that didn't matter to her. My pregnancy was yet another way I was stealing attention. My parents weren't much better. They didn't reach out to congratulate me, and from what I heard, they were still focused entirely on supporting Grace through her treatments. But for the first time in my life, I didn't care what they thought. I had Mark, I had a baby on the way, and I was determined to build a family rooted in love and respect, not manipulation and control. Thank you, guys, for sticking with me through this wild ride. Honestly, sharing all this has been both terrifying and freeing, but I'm so glad I did. For now, I'm just focused on moving forward and being the best mom to Lily.